Bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. So I have quite a few unfinished or partially finished books at the moment, and I just had such a lovely, cozy reading day today that I thought I would show you what I've been reading and share some thoughts on what I've just finished and what I've just started. So I have this lovely stack of books here to go through with you. The first book I have in this pile is A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. I just finished this book. I have so much to say about it that I think I will save it for a little later in this video. And I should talk about the other books first so that I don't spend this entire video just talking about A Passage to India, which is very likely to happen if I don't start with the other books first. The next book in this pile is Miss Austen by Gill Hornby, and this is one I am so excited for. This was kindly sent to me by a publicist from Flatiron Books, and it is my first review copy, or rather, first physical review copy ever on this channel, and I am beyond excited for it. It has already been published in the UK in January, but it comes out in the US on April 7th, 2020, but I'm so thankful that I get to read it in advance, and I've already started it, but just barely. I read the first chapter so far. This book is historical fiction all about Cassandra, Jane Austen's sister, and it focuses on Cassandra's life after Jane's death, because Cassandra lived quite a long time after Jane died. She lived for 28 years after Jane's death. Cassandra and Jane had a very close relationship. They were inseparable and they were the best of friends. So it's interesting to think of what Cassandra's life must have been like without Jane, especially since she also, like Jane, was engaged but never married. So it's not like she had a family to take care of after Jane died. Jane was really all she had. So this book supposedly looks at Cassandra's possible motives for destroying so much of Jane's written correspondence after her death, and it examines Cassandra's role in shaping Jane's literary legacy. I read the first chapter of this book so far, but it's still too early to really tell what I think about it. Needless to say, I am very, very excited about this book, and it's really a wonder that I managed to convince myself to film right now instead of reading it, so it means I like you guys a whole lot. I also have a half-finished Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. This was supposed to be a buddy read with Jenny from Bookish Shenanigans. She already knows how badly I feel about falling behind in this. I was enjoying it, but I kind of lost the desire and momentum to continue reading it when I stopped finding it so funny. The first half of this book was absolutely hysterical. It's about an orphaned socialite who, out of necessity, goes to live with her strange and rather uncivilized country relatives at Cold Comfort Farm. There are some bits of this that had me laughing out loud. It's very subtle in its brand of British humor, but I really do want to see how it ends and what happens to Flora. But unfortunately, my excitement has already moved on to other books, so hopefully I will get around to this, but I'm not holding my breath. And then I have My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This book is, much like the title suggests, about a character named Kurede whose sister is a serial killer, and it's about the lengths her conscience will let her go to continue protecting and enabling her psychopathic and murderous sister. It's a fairly intriguing premise, especially when you consider that I've been on a bit of a true crime kick lately, not with my reading, but with my TV shows, actually. I've been binge watching Criminal Minds lately. But it's the tone of this book rather than the subject matter that really makes it special. I found a review quote about this book that encapsulates its tone. It says that My Sister, the Serial Killer is a, quote, blackly comic novel about how blood is thicker and more difficult to get out of the carpet than water. So it's this dark comedy that really gets me excited about the book and led me to devour the first 20 pages of it, even though I had already started plenty of books that were just sitting out waiting for me to finish. I haven't read more of this book yet, but I do worry that the tone I love so much will get stale and ultimately undermine any emotional response or meaning associated with the book. It's way too early to tell if this book is at risk for that, though. I have just been thinking about it a lot I started this like a week and a half ago, read 20 pages, and then have just been thinking about it ever since. So it's almost like that tone has stayed in my mind this entire time, if that makes sense. I still think it's going to be a phenomenal book, but I need to read a little more than 20 pages to be sure. And now that I talked about those books, I can go back to talking about A Passage to India, which I'm very excited to discuss with you. E.M. Forster is easily becoming one of my favorite authors of all time, and I cannot wait to read his other works as well. I read my first E.M. Forster, I believe, at the end of 2018, and that was Howard's End, and it was amazing. I fell in love with that book, and this book has a lot of similarities in writing style, but is a very different novel. But they're both amazing. I don't even think I could pick a favorite if you asked me to. This book is utterly brilliant. It's beautifully written, and it's probably the most interesting and poignant book I've ever read about the clash between cultures and prejudice and racism. It takes place under British rule of India during the British Raj, and it follows both native British characters who've relocated to India, as well as characters of Indian descent. We are drawn to two characters, the elderly Mrs. Moore and the young Adela Quested. Adela has come to the town of Chandrapur in India to assess whether she should marry Mrs. Moore's son, who is a government official for the town of Chandrapur. The two women share a desire to see the real India rather than the watered-down British version of India that the majority of the British natives occupy. They befriend a Muslim doctor named Aziz, who takes them on an expedition to the beautiful and historic Marabar Caves. But when a scandal occurs on this expedition, it heightens the already tenuous race relations and really irrevocably affects all of those who are involved. This book is impeccably written, and it contrasts these gorgeous, sprawling descriptions of India's landscape with the minutiae of characters' dialogue. This book is about the gulf between people of different races and the difficulties of interpersonal relationships, as well as the effects of imperialism on society. Ultimately, this book questions whether individuals of different cultures can ever truly be friends within the confines of the power dynamic of imperialism. But this book doesn't simply say that British colonialism and imperialism was detrimental to Indian culture. The British aren't all villains, the Indians aren't all saints. This book really portrays a complex and nuanced view of interactions of different characters and leaves virtually no character truly blameless and unbiased. And even within Indian culture, there are deep-seated prejudices between the Muslims and the Hindus that, looking back on history, we know will lead to turmoil that creates the distinction between India and Pakistan. I'd like to share some passages with you to explore what I think of some of these nuances. So when Aziz takes Mrs. Moore and Miss Quested on this expedition, on this picnic, he states, "This picnic is nothing to do with English or Indian. It is an expedition of friends." So that is a wonderful sentiment, and while it is absolutely delightful to think of these characters as friends and to think of them as above the biases of their backgrounds and above racial prejudice that surrounds them, everything that every character in this book does puts them on a side, aligns them with one culture or another, whether it's the British, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Indians, which encompass the Hindus and the Muslims. Everything everyone does in their dialogue, in their personal interactions, does align them with a side in one way or another. And it's that sort of mentality that this book is getting at. It's quite ironic, this line, because what happens in the Marabar Caves is perhaps the most polarizing plot point of this book, but it's not just this big momentous scandal that causes this polarization. It's suffused in all of these interactions, these minute little details of dialogue and everyday conversation where you hear these alliances come into being. Another passage that I want to share with you and then talk about is this one. He was worn with indignation and suffering, and she wished she could comfort him, but intimacy seemed to caricature itself, and the more they spoke, the more wretched and self-conscious they became. I just love that line, but intimacy seemed to caricature itself. The idea of intimacy being something that you can fake, something that can be a caricature of itself, that can be exaggerated and so full of artifice, is just a really interesting concept. And it's particularly interesting in this passage because what I didn't tell you is who these characters are. These two characters aren't even from different races. They are both British. But I was looking through these other passages that I dog-eared. I dog-eared so many passages in this that were interesting to me. And many of them have the word intimacy in them and do actually include intimacy about different races. But the fact that this kind of artifice of intimacy can exist between the British themselves indicates that there's some larger problem with intimacy in this book, that it's not just a lack of intimacy between the British and Indians, but a lack of intimacy in the society, that this prejudice exists in society and has caused a chasm not just between the British and the Indians, but between the British themselves. Anyway, I feel like I am rambling on and I don't even know if I'm making sense anymore, but this book is utterly brilliant when it comes to the intersection of race, culture, prejudice, and imperialism, but I really haven't given it my full attention when it comes to gender. I think I need to digest it more and really think about it more, but I'm beginning to form the conclusion that it is not a particularly feminist book and actually perpetuates rape culture in less than ideal ways. Is it possible that a book can be so ahead of its time when it comes to race, but be so woefully misinformed and behind the times when it comes to gender? When I think about it more, will it taint my love for this book? I'll have to really think on these questions and see what I have to say as I mull over this book in the future. I am not done thinking about this book. I still have to discuss it in depth a little more with Claudia and Katie, and I'm sure you will be hearing more about it in another video soon, as you will with all of these books. But it was just fun to catch up with you and get some preliminary thoughts out there. Have you guys read any of these books? Do you think that a book can do one thing very well and fall behind on another aspect and still be an exceptional book, if that makes sense? Are you excited for me to finish any of these books? Obviously, besides A Passage to India, which I've already finished. I'd just love to hear your thoughts about anything I've said and anything you're reading that may or may not be related to what I'm reading. And I look forward to having a discussion in the comment section down below. And of course, I look forward to seeing you in another video soon as well. Bye!